Okay, so in this video, let's actually get to making some graphical user interface elements. So, graphical user interfaces are made of lots of different objects. You'd be most common with things like buttons or text boxes, or radio buttons or checkboxes or something like this, which you would have seen in other programs. But in MATLAB, all of these usually come under one object called a UI control. So let's make a UI control. So A equals UI control, and it's got this handle here and this little button that I'm clicking on. That's our UI control. So let's look at the properties for our UI control. So get A. It has a background color, it's got callbacks, it's got all these sort of things, font name, sizes, etc. You can follow along with this and have a look through each of these if you'd like. If we want to find a particular value for one of these properties, we can do get A and then what the property is called. So the property is this word that's here. So if we wanted to pull out the value for the background color, let's say, with the American spelling, this is what the color is represented as. So this is a type of gray. So with colors, you've got red, green, and blue. If they're all the same value, then you'll have a shade of gray. Now, there's one of these properties which is called style. Now, style is currently push button. So if we get a style, it's push button. Now, if we set a style, it'll actually give us a list of the different UI controls that it can take. So it's got curly braces around this push button, which means that's what it currently is. So if we set this to be a slider, for example, needs to be a string. So put this into a string. So now we've got the slider that's down here. So it's the same UI control, but it's now a different type. So we can play around with this and have a look at all the different types. Radio buttons. You've probably seen a couple of those before. An edit box. Which would let us put some text in, and etc. So I'll let you play through and have a look at all those different types, but they're all very useful. Some of the useful properties of these UI controls, I'll just go through. Background color will let you set the color of it. Callback I will go through in the next video. Font name, size, angle, these are pretty self-explanatory. They will define what the font will look like if there's some font in the UI control. Key press function will be covered with callbacks. Position is going to be very important. So if I just set my style back to being a push button, it's got some text which is remaining from when it was an edit box, but we'll go through that in a second. Position. So position of a UI element is defined as a 4 value array. It's without changing what the units are, it will default to being 20 pixels from the bottom of the figure, 20 pixels from the left, so 20 from the bottom, 20 from the left, and what are the other values? I think it's 60 and 20. So it's 60 pixels wide and then 20 pixels tall. So that doesn't actually change it. But if we set this to, say, 120 from the bottom, so 120 from the left, so 20 from the bottom, 120 from the left, but the element is the same size, it's moved up. So I had those two the wrong way around actually. So it goes from the left first, then from the bottom, and then the size. So this is how far away it is from the bottom left corner, and this is how big the element is itself. So we can make that a 200 by 200, and we've got a fairly big button now. What else is important? So we've got position, that's very important. String is another important one. Now there's a string in there at the moment, so if we get a string, it's got this text that we typed in before, and we can change that to being some other string. That changes what strings in our UI element. We've also got this units. So units is currently pixels. So as I was saying before, the position is based off however many pixels from the left from the bottom, and how many pixels wide and how many pixels tall the element is. But if we set the type, the units to being something else, so we'll just see what are available first. We've got inches, centimeters, normalized, points, pixels, and characters. Inches and centimeters is self-explanatory, but be very careful when you're using these because every monitor will look different. Normalized I'll talk about in a second. Points and characters are just certain sizes that were defined with typewriters and early computers, which have sort of just stuck around and been really annoying since. Pixels is how many dots up it is. Now normalized. Normalized is a very useful unit to work with. Now changing the units doesn't actually change what the button is doing. So if we now get our position, it's no longer based on pixels. So what normalized is it defines everything from between 0 and 1. So if we're on the left hand side of the screen, the left position is going to be 0. We're on the right hand side of the screen, the position is going to be 1. So what this allows us to do is set up all these as a relationship based on how big the figure window is. So as you notice, as I'm dragging this across, our button is getting smaller, but if the units was set to pixels, then that would not be happening. So we can set that position to be something else. Now 0.2, 0.2, and then let's say that the button is really big by 0.9 by 0.9. So now we have a really big button that's outside of most of the figure window. So that's what units and positions do. Now the last thing of note, last couple of note are going to be value. So some of these buttons and UI controls have this field called value. If we set the style, I'll have it above somewhere, set style to be a slider. I'm just going to make the position a bit smaller. So we've got this slider. Now, how far along this slider is in the slider box is defined by this value. So if we get a value, we can see that it's about 63% of the way across, which is what we want. So now it's about 91% across, so on and so forth. So value doesn't always have a value depending on what style it is, but some of these do. So it's important to know which ones do and which ones don't, and when you need to be using it. Now, there's a few more properties that are down here. Most of these you might run into at some later stage. Parent is a very useful one. So parent will actually give you the handle of the parent object. So the parent object in our case is this figure window. But if we were using radio buttons, it will actually return the radio button group. But sometimes this might be helpful if you need to know what owns that particular object that you're looking at. Selected is whether or not that object is selected. So I've selected it before, so get a selected should return 1. It's off. Now that actually might just be me selecting back into this window saying why it's not working. If I just set the style to be a push button, I'll know for sure. So yeah, me clicking back on this window is removing my selection of that object, but that's what that selected property is. So you can see like there's a little dotted line that's around here, and when I click back on this window, the dotted line goes away. Tag is another useful property. So tag is a human readable unique ID to this user element. So you have to set these manually. Now when you're using GUI controls manually, you probably don't need to worry about tag too much, but when we move on to MATLAB's Graphical User Interface Creator guide, tags are going to be a lot more important. User data is a property that allows us to store data associated to our button. It doesn't have to have anything in there at all, but if you need that button to store a bit of data, then I would suggest using user data. And finally, visible is whether or not we can see the object that we're looking at. So I'll just check what it requires. So it's either on or off. It's currently set to on. If we set it to off, it goes away. If we set it to on, it comes back again. So feel free to play around with these properties. Now, some of the other objects that you might want to look at are plots. So we've used plots extensively. Not enough input arguments. I'll just 1, 2, and 1, 1. So this should make some very basic plot for us. And it returns its own handle, so we can get B now, and we've got a different set of properties. I'll let you look through these on your own accord, because I can't really go through everything and all of them. But if you ever need more help on what any of these properties are, you can search them in the MATLAB help and they'll explain a bit more. So that covers the majority of the user elements that you'll use. Between plots, figures, and UI controls, you'll be able to make most anything that you want to make as a MATLAB GUI. So in the next screencast, I'll go through what callbacks are and how we can start getting our buttons and other controls to do things for us.